Right now, in the United States of America, a deadly fungal infection called Candida auris is rapidly spreading and has a 30% fatality rate. Given that we recently passed the 3-year anniversary of 15 Days to Slow the Spread, I don't blame people for being a little skeptical of the potential for another world-ending pandemic. Now, I'm not a believer in coincidence, but sometimes things are providential. This just so happened to become prevalent as soon as a certain show finished airing on HBO. I feel like the writers at the Deep State have been getting a little too on the nose with this current season, so I will promptly be filing a complaint with Cognito Inc. There was a point in my life for many years where I would have called The Last of Us my favorite video game of all time. And while my opinion on that claim has shifted slightly, it doesn't take away from the fact that I think The Last of Us still sits comfortably in my top 5. And I really think it's a testament to how well the story was. The Last of Us refined a very timeless type of story. The story of two people learning to love and find beauty through a bleak and unforgiving world. So when HBO announced it would be spearheading an adaptation of the game, I was met with hesitant excitement. That's because I was recently burnt out by The Last of Us Part 2, which I've stated on this channel multiple times that I am not a fan of. In this video, I won't be retreading that ground, nor will I be explaining why the original Last of Us still remains a masterpiece. Instead, I'll be focusing on how HBO's adaptation did from the perspective of a diehard fan trying to rationalize the changes made for an audience who hasn't played the game. Basically, everyone in my family and at work are talking about this show, and 95% of them haven't played the game. So my takes on this may be a bit anecdotal, but the plural of anecdote is data, so that's my sample size. Leading up to the release of the series, many of my concerns began to simmer down. For starters, some of the casting choices brought me relief, like Pedro Pascal and Nick Offerman filling the roles of Joel and Bill respectively. The director, Craig Mazin, who wrote for Chernobyl, gave me a bit more hope that he would play nicely with one of the game's original directors, Neil Druckmann. And from the many promos and trailers, things were looking very promising. Since live-action video game adaptations have had a significantly more spotted track record than their animated counterparts, there was a lot riding on the series. But as the show concluded, what I'm left with is that I can say it was definitely worth watching. I was pleasantly surprised with the quality and effort that HBO's The Last of Us showed. I know it was an easy layup given that all they had to do was follow the plot of the game to make people love it, but they did, and they did it pretty well. There were many scenes, dialogue, and shot compositions taken straight from the game, and tons of little Easter eggs and references planted throughout the world and these characters. This type of fan service is greatly appreciated because it's not overbearing in how in-your-face it is. Also, I think it was a really smart idea to consistently bring up cordyceps as the concept and reason for why the world is in the situation it's in. Not everyone is going to watch the behind-the-scenes segments and understand why it functions the way it does, or have seen this from BBC's Planet Earth before, so I definitely think that was a good call. And at the very beginning of the series, the cold open on that sort of interview establishes the tone and direction right away. I was certainly impressed with the direction they took Joel's character in this adaptation. While it wasn't perfect, and we'll get into what didn't work later, I think overall it captured what I wanted out of it. For starters, Pedro Pascal definitely feels like Joel, but a bit more reserved with his emotion. This works for me because you play as Joel in the game, and it's from a third-person perspective. He's not entirely devoid of personality, but he's definitely left much more ambiguous for most of the story than compared to another Naughty Dog protagonist like Nathan Drake. And that sort of allows you to imprint some of your personality onto him. Like when Joel loses Sarah at the beginning, you feel like you've lost your own daughter, and you can immediately understand it from his perspective. They decided to show more of Joel's age and reservations throughout this adaptation, which is certainly welcome. Nick Offerman as Bill was perfect casting, and there are many other performances that were just spot on for what a fan of the game would anticipate. Despite being cinematic, the game gives a very intimate feeling, and that's sort of reflected in a ton of character interactions. If I had to choose, I would say episodes 1, 5, and 9 are clear favorites and certified bangers in my book. But they're not perfect because, well, something is a little off for me. The show does look like The Last of Us, but kind of doesn't feel like The Last of Us. I don't know, it's weird. I imagine there would be some changes for practicality purposes, like you're going to change spores to mycelium, so I understand the reasoning for why you do that, because at least you try to make it work in this world. However, changes like that bring into question, why do clickers look the way they do if their heads never explode from spores? And that's not me asking that, someone from work brought that up to me, and I thought it was a pretty legitimate question. But that might just be nitpicking. I'm not really looking for a one-to-one copy of the game. Can an adaptation say something just as meaningful as its original source material while staying true to the spirit and the intensity of that source material. This is the reason I love the Jurassic Park movie just as much as I love the book. With HBO's The Last of Us, you have to justify why you should use your time for this experience versus the game, considering the time investment for both is pretty similar. And unfortunately, I don't think it doesn't feel like The Last of Us because they changed trivial things, like having the Pittsburgh set piece take place in Kansas City, or having the outbreak occur in 2003 instead of 2013. I mean, there's more explosions, there's more instances of kinetic action, and you're gonna get that when you want to appeal to a wider audience. That stuff is superficial. I think they changed something a bit more close to the core of what The Last of Us is, and that's our beloved lead, Ellie. Now, I'm not a fan of the direction they took Ellie's character in the HBO adaptation, and this comes from primarily two reasons: Bella Ramsey and how she was written. So let's talk about the one that matters less first, the casting. I'm sorry, this was just a massive miss for me. I know some people have made fun of her looks compared to the game version, but that doesn't matter to me. I don't care if Bella Ramsey isn't conventionally attractive or what people were anticipating. It's more about the delivery of lines and the presence she has on the show. And that's super unfortunate because for me and many people in my personal life, they saw her as kind of annoying. Not every scene by no stretch of the imagination, but it was grating at points. And I guess I have strong feelings about casting that were instilled to me back in high school. So this is kind of a personal story, but it stuck with me for a while, and I'm going to use it to justify why I don't think Bella Ramsey was the right choice for this role. When I was in high school, I was can't believe I'm saying this, a theater kid. Wash my hands after saying that. I know. Call the cringe department. Shuck was not based when he was a teenager. But anyways, our senior year musical was Beauty and the Beast. Now, as probably my favorite Disney movie, I was stoked to audition for all the male roles: the Beast, Gaston, Lumiere, etc. And after about a week of auditions, I received none of those roles. In fact, those roles were given to students who didn't even show up to the auditions, and they even gave Lumiere to a girl instead. And while this was a bit of a snuff from my perspective, I wrongingly wrote and sent a strongly worded email about how I thought the director was wrong and that I would boycott the play. Not my brightest moment, but it did lead me to meeting the director and having a discussion about why I didn't get any of the roles. I didn't have the voice of a Beast, the stature of a Gaston, or the charm of Lumiere. Sometimes people don't, and that's okay. It really gave me a lot of perspective on what I could change about myself, my intonation, my cadence, etc., which has positively benefited how I make videos on this channel today. To this day, I think that was the right decision, even if it was made on somewhat dubious terms. The point being is that it's okay to acknowledge a miscast when it happens without hating the actor or actress. We all did this when Tom Holland was cast as Nathan Drake in another Naughty Dog related product that hit the silver screen about a year ago. With Tom Holland, you could see he really did his homework on what goes into Nathan Drake's character, and he tried really hard, like a high school theater kid. But something about his performance just wasn't a right fit, and I feel the same way about Bella Ramsey as Ellie. I think this comes down to a lot of the line delivery in certain scenes. I love that the really heavy-hitting moments from the game were basically cut and paste into the show. However, in some of them, I just think Bella didn't give a good performance. Watching this is like trying to make me take a super duper emotional scene featuring Ben Stiller seriously. What stands out to me is the confrontation in the bedroom with Joel and when she first meets David. Some of these scenes are asking me to take her seriously when I can't because she's just not really emoting properly for what's needed in that given scene. Like, I can tell when she's just sort of cued to cry. I mean, I don't take it seriously. Like in the game, the scene took time to build up to tears. The scene took the wobbling in the characters' voices, the stuttering, the pauses, but in the TV show, no. Or when she's basically talking over David when they first meet. She's saying lines from The Last of Us, but they don't feel like the game because you can tell, in the game sense, Ellie's a bit unsure of her own situation right now, while she's trying to maintain a cool demeanor. Things like that are really important because it matters for how seriously you're going to take these characters. And when she's only shown to flip between smug quips and serious blank stares, I can't help but feel like it didn't do her justice. But as I've thought about it, it might be less of a problem with Bella Ramsey's acting ability and more of how she was written. I feel like the Ellie that we experienced in episode 1 is the Ellie we got near the end of The Last of Us game. Specifically in the fact that they didn't remove the arc she went through, but they kind of started it at her halfway point in the arc by making her super active instead of passive from the very first scene we see her in. In the game, when we first meet Ellie, she's trying to stab Joel because she thought she harmed Marlene, someone who she looks up to as a mother figure. And that relationship was completely removed from the show, which doesn't make sense, but whatever. Let's just keep moving on. In the show, Ellie is shown to be locked up and proactively trying to escape. Now, this gives the audience the impression that she's going to be the driving force in the story. And yes, of course, as a matter of plot, she is, but in the game, it's done differently. Ellie from the game, at least from the beginning, is passive in that Joel is directing her through the vast majority of situations. She really doesn't have a say, and he's the one snapping back at her on multiple occasions to show that he's in charge.
Go ahead, take my card. Take all my food, too, while you're at it.
By the looks of it, you could lose some of that food.
You listen to me, you little shit.
No, fuck you! You handcuffed me!
I need you to shut up. All right?
And this is really great because it gives us some massive contrast to where these characters start and end the game at. Ellie doesn't know everything, she's just a kid, but she's got potential that she hasn't realized. So that's why moments like when Joel is scolding her for using his gun when he told her not to are so important. They establish the buds of this familial love that the writers are building to. Ellie is often taken down a few pegs because Joel needs to do that in order to protect her, and then is given opportunities to teach her as a father would. But in the show, all of that is gone for the most part. Ellie is constantly flinging insults and punchlines outside of her pun book that are just so strange and unfitting for the situations they're in.
Steady, nice and slow.
You gonna shoot this thing or get it pregnant?
Kind of reminds me of something, but let's hold that thought for a moment. The stark difference in the show is how Ellie is now driving every conversation and scene, and Joel just sits there and takes it. Ellie is now the active one and Joel is the passive one from the beginning, so their roles have flipped. And you can't be surprised that fans of the game like myself would have some reservations on that change. It's why despite how I like the direction they took Joel's character in showing his age, one of the drawbacks is that you have to write this character more passively. And I think this really sticks out in two scenes. After Joel and Ellie have their fight, Ellie is given a choice to go with him or Tommy.
Ellie, get off your horse. Give it on back to Tommy. I'm gonna hang on to this fella, if that's all right with you. Go on, don't make me repeat myself.
What are you doing?
You know me, my mind's all made up.
And before Joel can even finish his sentence,
You deserve a choice. I still think you'd be better off with Tommy.
Let's go.
Okay.
it doesn't feel wholesome at all, like it was building towards something that the characters thought about it. It was like a light switch, snap, move on to the next scene. But what was even worse was the end of the David scene changed in a pretty important way. And you may not think it's important, but it says a lot about the direction the show wanted to take this character. Let's put aside the draining and eye-rolling scene where David was made to simp for Ellie by telling her how awesome and amazing and girl boss and equal she was. In the game, when Ellie is laying into David and spilling his brains out everywhere, Joel is the one to grab her and pull her back to reality. Joel wasn't there to save Ellie from David, but Joel is there to save Ellie from herself. And when Joel sees how much Ellie is hurting, that's why he comforts her, holds her, calls her his baby girl. The show, on the other hand, doesn't give us that interaction. Instead, Ellie hacks David's face away for much longer than it happened in the game, to a grotesque degree, and then is just left to wander outside until Joel runs into her somewhat randomly, and then does a similar interaction. Ellie stops herself because she don't need no man to tell her when enough vengeance is enough. But I really think this runs roughshod over what the game did so well at establishing. These two characters together make each other whole. You can't have one without the other in scenes like this. This is one of the many reasons why many people, myself included, might not have liked the direction the sequel took the story. But these types of changes aren't only limited to Ellie herself. I think these changes matter a whole lot more for this story specifically, and I can't shake the feeling that it's because Bruce Straley isn't co-directing. Bruce has always had a way to develop scenes and dialogue between characters that just flow so natural when you play as them. As a show, it just doesn't have that natural feeling. I get a feeling that many aspects of the show have been updated for a modern audience, and this bleeds in through multiple ways. I mean, characters' races are swapped, which in principle it's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't affect the overall message of the story, because the actors all played the characters well enough, but it does feel like an intentional change from the director's chair, specifically Neil. It's like the Hamilton way of casting. It just feels like you're trying to bait a response in some instances when you don't have to. which is what the sequel did. The sequel baited out anger from an audience before, and while the show doesn't do that to the degree the sequel did, it is noticeable. Or let's look at how some of the dialogue just changed to be cringe and quippy. The Last of Us had its funny moments, and many of those moments came from characters like Bill, but we weren't given the Bill's town as a place where Joel and Ellie could avidly explore, so we don't get that comic relief. Which brings into question, regardless of how well the characters acted in episode 3, did it affect the overall plot of the show? Especially to the point where the infected haven't played much of a role. Listen, I'm just a little salty they took away my fridge trap set piece. It was always one of my favorites from the game. A lot of these changes just feel unnecessary, which sucks because I'm often reminded how after every episode, I would much rather just be playing the game. And after most episodes, I did go back and just play the game. Some I enjoyed more, some I enjoyed equally, but the real reason all of these changes are taking place is a pretty cynical one. I feel like they're trying to ease people into the structure of The Last of Us Part 2 when Season 2 is released. Yes, there's a lot of ominous signs that the series is being prepped for the style of Part 2 rather than the original one, but there's only so much they could have deviated from the original game story. So that's why it's led to my pretty mixed feelings about the show. It seems that the feedback I've been getting is that episodes are really great or just a waste of time, and that's not uncommon for American media, especially shows on HBO. But it's just so sad because the original game was so universally beloved. There's never a dull moment in it. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's Neil's IP, he can do what he wants with it, but it doesn't mean I don't have to like everything about it. And it's really intriguing to see where he took this kind of story without someone like Bruce Straley balancing him out. It was really good to see a strong finish from the show in its final episode though, and given the popularity it has, it's just a matter of time until Season 2 comes. Episode 9 was phenomenal because it stuck super close to the source material, and even when it did deviate, it added content about Ellie's mother or Joel attempting to commit die that helped flesh out these detailed characters with stuff that was absent from the game while maintaining their overall personality. However, it was unfortunate to see by the last few episodes, the infected are basically a non-present. And without the constant threat of the infected, like in the game, it feels like the pacing of the show is a bit clunky, making me question like if we really needed 2 backstory episodes out of 9 to be dedicated to something else instead. Don't get me wrong, I like what we got, but revisiting it is kind of strange. I can't deny that I'm a little interested to see how they tell the story of the sequel and what kind of response the general audience might have to it. Since the last time I talked about The Last of Us Part 2, I promised to never buy another Naughty Dog game again, and to this day, I can proudly say I've kept up with that promise. And thank goodness I haven't bought anything, because have you seen the PC port? The Crashed of Us isn't like a fine wine, it doesn't get better with age. I don't think I'll ever stop enjoying the games that I did buy, besides one obvious exception. And despite all the changes that were made from the game, I still think the show is worth watching, but I can only imagine how many more people would love it if it stuck a little closer to what made the characters I fell in love with 10 years ago so unforgettably great. But that was the video. Thank you so much for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought about The Last of Us on HBO. Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm genuinely curious because I've gotten vastly different responses from people in my personal life. If you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. Have a beautiful doing, and I'll see you all next time.